Welcome and thank you all for joining today's Workday Chats. My name is Kumari Williams and I am your host for today. And I'm super excited to get into our esteemed panel. Let's start by introducing our first panelist, Glenn Bacalso. He's a Senior Customer Advocacy Manager and Global Community Liaison for our Pride EBC. And EBC stands for Employee Belonging Council, which is what we call our ERGs here at Workday. Next, we have Jametta Barden, who's the Principal Program Manager of Diversity Talent Acquisition. And Jametta is the co-lead of our Women at Workday Atlanta chapter, and she's also active in several other EBCs here at Workday. Then lastly, we have James Cross, who's the Vice President of Strategy and Executive Sponsor of our Pride EBC. And very nice for all of you guys joining today, super excited about the topics. So we're excited to jump in and talk about how Workday, how we foster inclusion, how we foster equity, belonging at our organization. And I do want to talk briefly about how our strategy is aligned and what we're doing to further our commitment when it comes to valuing inclusion, belonging, equity, which is really at the center of what we're doing. That's our commitment, and that's also our strategy for how we're moving our initiatives forward. So to kick the conversation off, I'd love to hear about each of your journeys here at Workday. Let's talk a little bit about your leadership as an EBC leader, and let's also talk about your individual, your personal commitment to Vibe. So why don't we start with you, Jametta, and tell us about why you're so passionate about this. What gets you excited about Vibe?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Jametta Barden, as you mentioned. I started here at Workday back in 2015. And when I came through the door, I asked about our employee resource groups as I knew them, because I had participated in some of those groups in a former employer. Then learned that we had started what is now called the Black at Workday EBC, or Employee Belonging Councils. And I wanted to get one started in Atlanta where I was working. So came into Workday, started to learn about how to establish an EBC. And really it was about creating a safe place for other people that, are like me. I wanted to make sure that we were increasing our representation through recruiting and just providing opportunities for people to feel like they belong. I'm really committed to it. First of all, because I am a Black woman in corporate America, and especially in tech, I know that there are, small numbers of women, people of color in the tech industry, and I wanted to do something about that. So I got involved in the Employee Belonging Councils, and it's one of the best things that I've done. So we do value inclusion, belonging, and equity.
And it's kind of a full circle moment for you, Jametta, having started to develop the Talented 10th, now Black at Workday, and now you're sitting in Diversity TA proper. So that's certainly exciting.
Yes, it is. It's a dream job, actually. So it doesn't really even feel like work.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Glenn, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So I joined Workday close to 5 years now, and actually joined through the sales organization. And I was lucky enough to get an internal opportunity to move to marketing. And now I look after the customers in APJ. How I started Vibe was sort of similar with Jametta. You try to look for people to identify with. And when I was in Singapore, there were no EBCs at all. And there was no people that I could identify with. So it's either people who were so shy, or people who might probably not comfortable to come out and engage conversation with me. So that gave me an idea to, why not start an EBC? So I reached out to our Chief Diversity Officer, Karen Taylor, and asked her, can I start the Pride EBC in conservative Singapore? She said, why not? Just go for it. So we launched it immediately on our first Vibe week globally in 2019. And fast forward now, we have 4 Pride EBCs in APJ, and I'm now a global community liaison for Pride. So things have definitely progressed even through a pandemic. And the reason why I continue to stay passionate about this is because I just want people to have role models in the community, especially in conservative Asia, because I didn't have that growing up from my hometown back in the Philippines, and navigating this corporate ladder. I just want my community to know that there are companies like Workday who value individuals for who they are, make them feel safe and truly shine to be their authentic selves, and also eventually really have equal opportunities to succeed and have a meaningful career. So that's what keeps me going for 3 years now in my work with the EBCs. Kumari.
Awesome. You touched on inclusion, belonging, and equity. So you checked all three boxes there. Thanks, Glenn. James, how about you?
Hey, well, thank you for the invite, and it's great to join you all today. Excited for the conversation. So I also joined Workday back in 2015, so coming up to my 7th year anniversary in a few months' time. Originally joined through a startup acquisition. We were a team of around 25 people and went from that small team to a very, very big organization at Workday. I've held a number of different product strategy and go-to-market roles during my time at Workday. Today, I lead a team that's building new technologies and products and infrastructure for the future of the workforce. So kind of my first time leading an engineering team of this size, which has been a great career experience. And since the very start, when I joined Workday, I've been involved with what's now called the Pride EBC. Back when I joined, it was quite Bay Area centric. And so it's been great to see the Pride EBC grow. It's been great to see folks like Glenn really take the lead in different regions. And I think as Workday has grown, our reach as a Pride EBC has really grown as well. Into really lots of global events and a really global community, which has been great to see. For me, it's important to just be visible and present as a gay leader at Workday and to really lean into the EBC and lean into the work that we do. So it's been a really fulfilling journey for me.
Awesome. You actually lead right into my next question, James. And as a leader of leaders, how are you and how would you encourage other leaders of leaders or just the individual contributors to foster those senses of community, inclusion, belonging, and equity? How are you actively doing that with your teams?
Yeah, really great question. For me, it's all about showing up in the right way and in an authentic way. So I'm very kind of open about my sexuality. People know that I'm a gay leader at Workday. And I think it's really important that we take personal responsibility and really model the kind of thoughtfulness and inclusive behaviors and vulnerability that we really want to see across our teams, knowing that we really set the tone across our organizations as leaders. Another really important thing for me is creating trust and psychological safety across our teams and organizations. First of all, this makes really good business sense. We know that teams where there's really good psychological safety and trust are really high performing and can innovate and can really build great products. But also that kind of psychological safety really sets the baseline for a work environment where diversity, inclusion, and even kind of mental well-being can already have those kind of baseline ingredients to flourish. So they're probably the two things that I try and do as a leader, but it all comes down to showing up in a really kind of authentic and sometimes vulnerable way.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jametta, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, James, I definitely agree with you when you talk about creating a safe space. When you are able to create a safe space, there are conversations that can be had. People can become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it allows for discussions that we normally wouldn't have in this space, right? Especially in corporate space. I think when we recognize that there is the need amongst our workmates for belonging and for inclusion, what are the boots on the ground saying about how people feel at the organization? Do they feel like they're included, or do they feel ostracized? And so I ask questions. I like to anytime I see anyone in the office that I don't recognize, I would say, "Hey, I'm Jametta, nice to meet you. Where are you from? How are you? Let's have a coffee chat." And I think that creates that feeling of belonging and feeling of inclusion, because now they know at least one other person in the office. And so I think that helps to create the environment where conversations can be had. I think once we find that out, once we find out that there are people who are in the office who may not have a whole lot of friends, or maybe they're new, or they have a need to feel like they belong, then we need to share that with leadership too. What programs, what can we do? What can we do as an EBC? What can we do as an organization, as a company? What can we do in our community to make people feel like they are being heard, that they have an opportunity to contribute to the company. And I think all of those things are important in creating that environment, an environment of safety, an environment where you can be your authentic self.
You know what, Jametta, what I just heard is responsibility. Like we're
Absolutely.
individually responsibility for the experiences of not just ourselves, obviously, as we show up, but for our peers and the other people that we work with. So we all have a responsibility to ensure the belonging and inclusion of other people. So it is not just an individual kind of work. We should be focused on the people around us. So I like that.
Absolutely.
Glenn, what would you add? I know we've not quite touched on allyship, so hopefully you can pull through some themes there, but I'll open it up to you for anything you want to add to this question.
Sure, and I totally agree with what Jametta and James said. Is representation, speaking up, and really showing up for people that need it, and speaking up when there's a need to is really important. That's why it's also important to support and sponsor EBCs in the first place, because we need all of that support from leadership. We need, to help, create all this programs to create a culture of visible commitment, accountability, and participation for everyone to really enjoy Vibe. But one thing I wanted to add too is, it's important to recognize really the intersections of all of our identities. Employees want spaces that welcome all of who they are, not just one label. Most of us identify in multiple ways, not just by our sexuality or our gender, and we want to be valued based on the totality of who we are. So that's, I think, important for everyone, especially leaders, to really fully understand their employees and really be a great advocate for them and truly understand what they need and what they want. So I think that's important, and be a great ally for everyone.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about you're talking about intersections, but let's talk about similarly the intersection between belonging and mental health. And as a person who had a parent that struggled with mental illness growing up, this is something that's very near and dear to me. But I would love your perspectives on how do we tie the two together? How do you champion belonging, inclusion, equity, while also pulling in that element of well-being? Why don't we start with you, Glenn, since you were just talking, pull in your experiences in these spaces and help us kind of connect those dots of well-being and belonging.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it's always been a conversation right now. And I remember the time years ago, I actually worked as a mental health nurse. So being able to relay that to what I've had in the past and also what I'm seeing in corporate world right now, I think being surrounded by other human beings doesn't really guarantee a sense of belonging. Belonging actually has to do with identification as a member of a group and the higher quality interactions which come from that. And I think that's one of the reasons why work is such a powerful source of belonging. It's because we typically share identity with a team. So when the pandemic happened and we miss a lot of that, we miss all of their social interactions and things that make us feel we belong in the office. I think we have to try extra harder. There's other things that we should do, and we should be intentional in the things we're creating. Like Jametta mentioned earlier, embrace new friendships. There's a lot of new people and workmates who joined via Zoom have never probably met anyone in physical, right? So be proactive and show your new workmate, get to know them. They probably sometimes feel like they're not part of a team because everyone that they've seen is all virtual, right? And one thing important that I know from my community is really use inclusive language, especially when you're talking or communicating remotely, because sometimes we try to assume based on what we see. So always try to ask and never assume. So what I would usually do if it's my first time meeting someone or a new workmate, or a new customer, a new partner, I would introduce myself and introduce my pronouns so that he or she would be comfortable to introduce, or they would be comfortable to introduce their pronouns as well. So let's just continue. I think just try to continue to be more open, more vulnerable, and most importantly, be empathetic towards others. I think check in as much as we can. And one more thing that I should add is really let's normalize asking for breaks. I think that's something, especially within Asia, it's a mentality that overworking means being successful. And I think that's something that we should really try to to stop and really try to promote mental health breaks, physical health breaks, because everyone needs it. Even just a change of scene, a change of pace is really, really good for your mental health.
And I agree. I'll add to that and just say, also check on your neighbor, check on your coworker, and be intentional about making sure that you're asking questions that you really want to hear the answer to, as opposed to just kind of moving past it. Hey, Glenn, how are you? And then you're like on to the next thing, as opposed to sit in there for a second, sit in the conversation, actually wait for the person to respond. And then if they respond in a way that says, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper to see what state they're in, as opposed to just getting so quick to the business. I find that in this environment, especially working virtually, it's important to truly check on people, because we can all put the Zoom facade up and act like everything is okay, and we are falling apart behind Zoom. So I would also just add a check-in on people. Jametta, what points would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, I think, Glenn hit on so many great points. Here in Atlanta, one of the things that we did was we put together this group. We called it the Atlanta Come Together Team. And some of the things that were suggested were to have an EAP counselor to come and to talk to all of our workmates. And this was after COVID and the George Floyd murder. We had lots of concerns about how people were doing, right? Are they okay? And so we figured that we could create an environment where we can, again, have conversations, talk through it, make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share what they feel. I can remember going through a roller coaster ride of emotions. One day I'd be good, the next day I'd be crying, the next day I'm angry. And so I went through, this wealth of emotions, and having this team of people together really was helpful for my mental health, for feeling like I belonged, and for feeling included, because there were other people that felt the same way. In addition, in Atlanta, we created the Vibe Book Club, is what it started as. And we started reading books around diversity and how we could get along better, inclusion, belonging. It eventually turned into the Vibe Media Club, because we started watching documentaries, we started, watching YouTube videos, along with reading books in between. And so that organization still goes on today. We meet weekly. So we've been meeting weekly for almost 2 years now. So that has been very helpful. We're very, it's an intimate setting where you can be very authentic and ask questions. Many times we just don't know what the other people are experiencing. Even recently, with some of the things that have happened in the news, we've been able to discuss those in that book club. One of the other things that we did was we had what we called new hire connections. And so we partnered people who had been with Workday for more than a year, or at least before COVID, with those who were brand new employees. And so we would just call them, have a coffee chat, talk to them and say, hey, I'm a friend. Where are you from? Where did you go to school? What do you do for fun? Tell me about your family. And I think all of those things helped the new people to feel like they were a part of the Atlanta office, right? And to have an opportunity to meet someone else. So we weren't together in the office yet, but the opportunities to meet in the office, once we did that, we were able to meet all of those folks. And it was really cool to have not only met them online and through Zoom calls and coffee chats, but to meet them in person. And so it felt like a family reunion of sorts. But I think if we continue to check in with folks, I have at least 4 coffee chats every month with new employees, with existing friends and workmates. And I think that that's top of mind for just, again, belonging, and then for our mental health.
I like that. Those are really good tips. James, what would you like to add?
Absolutely, really great points. And leading on from a couple of Jametta's points, I've noticed recently when I'm in the San Francisco office, I know we've grown a lot as a company through the past few years, and there's a lot of people who've joined Workday and only have a virtual connection to their colleagues and to the culture and to the company. And sometimes when I'm in the SF office, I'll look around the break room and you can just see some people that maybe are a little bit intimidated. They're new to the in-person culture. Coming back to the office is a transition for them. And as Jametta said, just kind of walking up to people and checking in and introducing yourself just lets them know that, hey, that kind of really friendly, great culture we have at Workday you've experienced virtually, that happens in person too, and it's even better in person. So I think just showing up in that way is really important and just looking out for folks. I also think modeling healthy behaviors is really important too. So making sure as a leader that you take PTO and that people know that you're taking PTO so they can see that that's okay and that's a good thing to do. Throughout COVID in the products and technology organization, we had what we called No Meeting Wednesdays, which was a time to catch up on things and kind of step away from the computer if we needed to. And if I went out for a walk or went to get some like vitamin D on Wednesday afternoons, I'd post a selfie or just let my team know to say like, hey, it's okay, you should be doing this too. And we're really encouraging and nobody's going to mind if you step away from the computer. Skip levels and one-on-ones are a really great opportunity, obviously, to check in with the broader team. And I think often in skip levels, you want to check in on the day job and like, how is this project going? How is the delivery going? How is this like delivery of a new platform going? But it's also really important to check in on a personal level and just be open, ask open questions, and even just kind of use kind of intuition and empathy to just see how a person's doing, like visually. Like, does this person look tired? Do they look like they could take a break? And just kind of checking in with them as an authentic human, and really getting to know folks on the team too, and getting a sense of things that way. Finally, I'd also say being vulnerable is important too. For Mental Health Week a couple of years back, I wrote a piece on the kind of Workday internal intranet on how I personally kind of dealt with anxiety and how exercise and fitness help with that, and some of the routines I found that helped me. And I think just being kind of open about some of the wellness journeys we go through as leaders and as workmates, it's really good to share those things so that folks can see that we're human, we're authentic, and we can be vulnerable as well.
I love that. The truth is, as leaders, we have to share the things that we're struggling with, as well as the things that they're doing well, but transparently letting our teams know that it's okay to step away, letting them know that you're not having a good day and why, and just being really honest so that people can relate to you, as opposed to thinking as a leader you have it all together, because we don't, frankly, have it all together all the time. So we're getting close to our time together, wrapping up, but I do want to be able to share with our audience today a few key takeaways so that we can advance inclusion, belonging, and equity. Why don't we start with you, Jametta, about some things that are takeaways for our audience? What are some tangible things that they can use to implement Vibe in their day-to-day working relationships?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be difficult. It's very easy. Just start where you are and with the people around you. Just say hello and really, truly care about people. I think just saying hello, sharing a smile will do more for so many people than you can ever know. So it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. Just start where you are. Say hello, share a smile.
James, what would you like to add to the topic here?
Absolutely. So I think for me, it all comes down to kind of showing up authentically, being visible in your own self-care, and also interacting with people in an authentic and caring and open way, and just checking in with them and getting a sense across the team of how things are going, and really, above all, creating that sense of psychological safety and trust. That's really the foundation for everything else. Yeah.
That's awesome. Glenn, how about you?
I'd like to end with this lovely quote from Pat Waders, which says, "When we listen and celebrate what is both common and different, we become wiser, more inclusive, and better as an organization." So I think, just going back to what I said earlier, let's really take time to listen and holistically understand each other's experiences and differences. Be kind to one another. And one more thing, in order to advance, value, inclusion, belonging, equity, or Vibe, it's not just a responsibility of a few committed advocates. It is really something that everyone in the organization should understand and be accountable for in order to produce meaningful and lasting change. That's my last key takeaway.
Well, you kind of stole my key takeaway. So I will just add quickly that I think we all have a part to play. I think that's the important takeaway for me, is that we each have a role in the collective belonging and inclusion for all of our employees in our workspaces. And so we all have to take ownership and take our part in ensuring that we have an environment that feels inclusive and an environment that people feel like they want to be a part of and they belong to. So this wraps up our time today. Thank you each for participating, and thank you to our audience for attending today. And we look forward to seeing you on our next Workday Chat.